The morning my husband told me she didn't want his money, I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing my coffee mug. I remember the water was too hot. I remember thinking, that's a strange thing to say out loud. She's not like that, he said. She's not after anything. You can have the house, the accounts, everything. We'll be fine. I turned off the faucet, set the mug down, looked at him standing in the doorway in his work clothes, already packed, already halfway gone, and I thought, he actually believes that. His name was Wade. We'd been married for 9 years. I'm a corporate paralegal. I've worked at the same firm in Chicago for 11 years, long enough that the senior partners know my name, long enough that I've seen what happens when people make decisions with their hearts instead of their heads. I've watched men sign away businesses over women they met 6 months ago. I've watched women walk into settlements that looked fair until the ink dried. I know what you can have everything actually means when a man says it while standing in your kitchen at 7 in the morning, suitcase by the door. It means he already knows something you don't. I didn't cry. I dared say that to sound tough. I genuinely couldn't, not in that moment. I just stood there with my hands wet and watched him pick up his bag and walk out. He didn't slam the door. That somehow made it worse. I'd found out 3 months earlier. It wasn't dramatic. There was no lipstick on a collar, no suspicious text I stumbled across. I found out the way a lot of women find out, by noticing that my husband had started being very, very careful. Wade was a financial advisor. He'd worked at a mid-size wealth management firm in the Loop for 12 years, built up a decent book of clients, made good money. We had a 4-bedroom house in Oak Park, 2 cars, a joint account we'd had since year 2 of our marriage. He was not a secretive man. He left his phone on the counter. He told me about work drama the way some people narrate sports games, with detail and enthusiasm and absolutely no filter. And then one day he stopped. Not suddenly, gradually. The phone moved from the counter to his pocket. He started stepping outside to take calls. He came home later, showered before dinner instead of after. Started going to the gym on Saturday mornings, even though he'd never once gone to the gym on a Saturday morning in 9 years of marriage. I didn't say anything for 2 months. Part of me didn't want to know. Part of me kept thinking, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe work is just stressful. Maybe I'm reading into things. I kept setting the table for 2 and telling myself I was imagining it. Then in October I had to access our shared drive to pull a document I'd scanned months ago. Our homeowner's insurance, which our firm needed a copy of for something unrelated. And while I was in there, I saw a folder I didn't recognize. It was labeled with a client's initials, which wasn't unusual. Wade sometimes saved things to our shared drive when he was working from home. But something made me click it. Inside was a paper trail, not of an affair exactly, of something more complicated than that. Wade had been redirecting a portion of his commission income into a separate account I had no knowledge of. Small amounts, over a long period of time. The kind of thing you'd do if you were planning something and you didn't want the other person to see it coming. I sat in front of that laptop for 45 minutes without moving. Then I closed the drive, made dinner, and didn't say a word. I want to be honest about what came next, because I think this is the part that people would judge me for. I didn't confront him. I didn't throw things or cry or demand answers in the middle of the night. I called my friend Patrice, who is a CPA, and I asked her to help me understand exactly what I was looking at. What I was looking at, it turned out, was almost 4 years of diverted income. Not a dramatic amount each time. Never enough to trigger anything on a joint tax return. Never enough to feel missing. But added up, across 46 months, it was substantial. Over $200,000 that existed in an account I had never seen, in Wade's name only. Patrice was quiet for a long time after she finished walking me through the numbers. "When did you say you found this?" she asked. 3 weeks ago. "And you haven't said anything to him?" "No." "Okay." Another pause. "You need to talk to someone before you do anything, not a friend." "A divorce attorney." I already had a name. One of the partners at my firm had referred clients to a woman named, I'll just call her my attorney. because this part isn't about her. She was sharp and methodical, and when I walked into her office and laid out what I had, she didn't look surprised. She looked focused. "You work in legal," she said. "Paralegal. 11 years. Then you already know you're in a stronger position than most people who sit in that chair." I did know. That didn't make it easier. But I knew. We filed for divorce in November. Wade didn't know yet. I hadn't told him. In Illinois, you don't have to notify your spouse the moment you file. I had a 60-day window and I used it. The woman was named Courtney. I found out her name the same week I filed, through the most mundane possible means, a charge on Wade's credit card statement, which he'd made the mistake of still paying through our joint account, to a restaurant I recognized because I'd been there once for a work lunch. A restaurant on the north side, nowhere near our house, nowhere near his office. I googled the charge, found the restaurant, found a review Wade had left under his own name 6 months earlier, and in the comments, someone had replied to him using the name Courtney with a little heart emoji. I didn't look her up beyond that. I decided it didn't matter who she was. That sounds cleaner than it felt. Truthfully, I opened Instagram about 4 times over the next 2 weeks and stopped myself each time. What she looked like, what she did, how long this had been going on, none of it would change the numbers in that folder, none of it would change what I was going to do. What I focused on instead was the house. Our house in Oak Park was in both our names, purchased in 2018 for $410,000. By that November, comparable homes on our street were selling for over $600,000. I had been the one to manage the refinancing 2 years prior. I knew our equity position better than Wade did. He was good at managing other people's money, genuinely. But our personal finances he'd always left to me. Which is its own particular irony. I spoke to a real estate attorney. I spoke to my divorce attorney again. I made a plan. Wade told me about the affair on a Thursday night in December. He came home late, sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and said he needed to talk. He was nervous in a way I hadn't seen him be nervous in years, tapping his fingers, not meeting my eyes. I remember thinking that he probably practiced the speech. He told me her name. He told me it had been going on for about a year. He said he was sorry, that he hadn't meant for it to happen, that he cared about me, but that he wasn't in love with me anymore, and he thought we both deserved to be honest about that. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, he said, "I think we should separate. I know this isn't what either of us wanted, but I think it's the right thing." And then he said the thing about the money. About how she wasn't like that. About how I could have the house, the accounts, everything. I asked him one question: "Are you sure that's what you want?" He said yes. I nodded and said, "Okay." He looked almost relieved. I think he'd expected a scene, expected me to fall apart. I've thought about that a lot since, that he knew me well enough to be worried, but not well enough to know what I was actually thinking. I already knew about the separate account. I already knew about the hidden income. I already knew that when he said, "You can have everything," he was talking about the visible everything, the house, the joint savings, the car. He was being generous with the portion of our assets he was planning to disclose. What he didn't know was that I had already spent 2 months documenting the portion he wasn't planning to disclose. He moved out in January. He went to stay with his brother in Wicker Park, which told me that he and Courtney weren't moving in together yet, which told me something about where that relationship actually stood. He was breezy about the whole thing. Texted me sometimes about logistics. Came to pick up the rest of his things on a Sunday afternoon and was in and out in under an hour. That same week, I listed the house. I'd had it staged by a professional and priced at $595,000. It went under contract in 11 days. I remember the day I signed the seller's agreement, sitting at my dining room table with a notary, and just feeling very, very calm. The divorce proceedings were a different story. When Wade's attorney first saw the financial disclosure documents I submitted, the ones that included the 46 months of diverted income, the account statements, the paper trail I'd been quietly assembling since October, Wade called me. It was the first time he'd called, not texted, since he'd moved out. "Where did you get that?" was the first thing he said. "You left it on our shared drive." Silence. "You've had this since October." "Yes." "And you didn't say anything?" "No." I could hear him breathing. I had spent months imagining this phone call, and I'd expected to feel something, vindicated, or angry, or even sad. Mostly I just felt tired. Tired in the way you feel when something that's been a long time coming finally arrives. "Joanna," he started, then caught himself because that wasn't my name. My name isn't Joanna. I think he'd been rehearsing a different version of this conversation in his head. "What do you want to do?" I asked him. "We can let the attorneys sort it out, or we can sit down and talk about this like adults. Either way, that money is part of the marital estate and it will be treated as such." There was a very long pause. "I'll talk to my attorney," he said. "That's probably wise. Here's the thing about hidden money in a marriage. It rarely stays hidden once a forensic accountant starts looking. Wade knew that. He built his entire career on understanding how money moves, where it goes, how it gets traced. He'd been careful. But careful isn't the same as invisible. And once my attorney brought in a forensic accountant and we started pulling on threads, the picture that emerged was more complete than even I had anticipated. Beyond the main account, there were investments. Not huge, we're not talking about offshore accounts or anything like that, but there were brokerage accounts and deferred comp arrangements that hadn't made it into his initial disclosure. Standard divorce strategy, my attorney said, happens all the time. People think if they don't mention it, no one will check. They always check. The settlement negotiation took 4 months. There were 3 different meetings in my attorney's conference room where I sat across from Wade and watched him realize, piece by piece, that the version of this divorce he planned, the one where he walked away with a clean start and $200,000 in a separate account and a fresh life with Courtney, was not the version that was happening. He was not speechless exactly. He was very careful with his words. But I watched his face on the day his attorney delivered the final settlement figure, and I understood, maybe for the first time, that he had genuinely not expected this. He had married me because he loved me. He had stopped loving me somewhere along the way. And somewhere in between those two things, he had decided that because he'd built his career on understanding money, and I was just a paralegal who managed his personal accounts, he had the upper hand. He was wrong about that. The settlement was finalized in June. I won't share exact numbers out of respect for the process, but what I will say is that my attorney was very good at her job, and the forensic accountant was even better. And what I walked away with was significantly more than the house and the joint accounts. I kept the proceeds from the house sale. I kept my share of the retirement accounts. I received a portion of the diverted income, not all of it, because nothing in a divorce settlement is ever exactly what's fair, only what's negotiated, but enough, more than enough to start over. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Square in late spring. The neighborhood's good coffee shops and a farmer's market on Saturdays, and it is nothing like the house in Oak Park where I spent the last 5 years of my marriage feeling, in retrospect, increasingly invisible. I went back to work the Monday after I signed the final paperwork. My colleagues didn't ask too many questions. Patrice took me to dinner and we split a bottle of wine and talked for 3 hours about everything except the divorce. It was the best night I'd had in a long time. I found out about Courtney through Wade's brother's wife, who texted me in September, about 3 months after the settlement, to let me know that Wade and Courtney had broken up. She wasn't sure of the details. She just thought I should know. I read the message twice and then set my phone face down on the couch. I'm not going to pretend I felt nothing. I did feel something. Not happiness exactly. More like the strange, hollow sensation of a story ending that you've been bracing for the ending of for so long that the ending itself felt almost beside the point. A few weeks later, I ran into someone at a networking event, a woman who worked in wealth management, knew some of the same people Wade did. Casually, she mentioned his name, said she'd heard he'd had a tough year professionally, a few client departures, some compliance review at his firm. Nothing that would make the news. Just the kind of thing that happens when the personal life falls apart and bleeds into the professional. I nodded and said something vague. She moved on to other topics. I thought about it on the drive home, about how it wasn't what I'd imagined for him. Not a dramatic collapse, not a public fall. Just the ordinary, incremental way that life gets smaller when you've made enough bad decisions in a row. People ask me sometimes, when I tell this story, which I don't often but occasionally, whether I'm angry. The honest answer is that I was. For a long time, I was furious in a way that felt almost physical. This low-grade, constant heat that I carried into work and into the grocery store and into conversations with my sister on Sunday phone calls. I was angry at him for the money, obviously. But I think what I was angrier about was the assumption that he'd looked at the person who managed our home, handled our insurance and our taxes and our refinancing, built a career in legal for 11 years, and decided she wouldn't know what she was looking at. That assumption cost him a great deal. Do I wish things had gone differently? That's a harder question. I wish I hadn't spent 9 years with someone who was capable of what he did. I wish I'd seen it sooner. But I don't wish I'd handled it differently, no. I was methodical when I needed to be. I was patient. I let the process work. And now I'm 34 years old, with a good apartment in a neighborhood I love, a job I'm genuinely good at, savings that are mine, and the extremely specific satisfaction of knowing that when someone hands you a problem, you can solve it. Wade thought he was walking away with everything. As it turned out, the math didn't work out that way. I've thought a lot about the moment Wade picked up his bag and walked out the door. How calm he was. How certain. He'd done the math in his head and decided he already knew how this would end. What he didn't account for was that I had done the math too. There's something I've come to believe about the way life works, not in any grand spiritual sense, just in a plain, observable one. The choices people make tend to catch up with them in proportion to how long they've been making them. Wade didn't make one bad decision. He made hundreds of small ones over nearly 4 years, and each one left a mark somewhere. A folder on a shared drive, a restaurant charge on a joint account, a paper trail he assumed no one was looking for because he assumed the person closest to him wasn't paying attention. That assumption was the thing that undid him more than anything else. I think about integrity a lot differently now than I did when I was 25. I used to think of it as a quality some people had and some people didn't, like a personality trait, something fixed. What I understand now is that it's more like a practice. Every day you either build it or you erode it, one small choice at a time. Wade eroded his so gradually that I don't think he even noticed it happening. By the end, he'd convinced himself that what he was doing was reasonable, that he deserved a fresh start. That rerouting $200,000 away from a shared life was just smart planning. The thing is, I can't be angry at him for underestimating me without also being honest about what I learned from it. For years, I managed our finances, handled our refinancing, dealt with our insurance, and I let myself be treated like the background of our marriage, not dramatically, not cruelly, just quietly overlooked. I think I accepted that without question for longer than I should have. So when I finally sat down with that laptop and understood what I was looking at, the decision to be methodical, to call Patrice, to find an attorney, to document everything before saying a single word, that wasn't coldness. That was me deciding, for the first time in years, to use what I actually knew, to trust my own mind instead of waiting for someone else to tell me what the situation was. That took something. Not toughness in the aggressive sense, more like the quiet, stubborn kind. The kind that gets up on Monday morning and goes to work and makes the next right call and doesn't perform its pain for anyone. Patrice saw it. My attorney saw it. I don't think Wade ever saw it, which is part of why we're not married anymore. I'm 34. I live in a neighborhood I chose for myself, in an apartment that is mine. I have a savings account with a number in it that I earned and protected. And I have the specific, unflashy confidence that comes from having gone through something hard and handled it well. Not perfectly, not without grief, but well. The math worked out. It just didn't work out the way he planned.